So come into standing and begin to just notice where your pelvis is in space in relationship to your ribcage. Does the pelvis seems to be behind your ribcage or in front of your ribcage? Okay. You can also take some bony landmarks of the two hip points. Feel into where your tailbone is, your coccyx, where your pubic bone is, as well as where your two sit bones are. So maybe it's hard for you to feel the two sit bones while standing, because standing tends to be a little bit more of a contracted state, especially if you are holding a lot of tension in the body. But I'd like you to just take a moment to feel, to sense, where is your pelvis in relationship to the ribcage? And overall, how are you breathing? What's your relationship with space and gravity? Is there any part in the body that you feel that you're gripping or that is rigid or you are holding in order to be in an upright position at this time? Let's take a few breaths. Just notice the movement of your breath. If the breath is more in the chest or in the belly, or if you can feel the movement of your breath at all. And if you can also sense if the breath is more in the front body, the back body. If you can feel the breath in the two sides of the body, maybe the sides of your waistline. Okay. So if your pelvis is behind your ribcage, you're tending more into an anterior tilt. If your pelvis is sensing, you're feeling your pelvis is more in the front of your ribcage, then you're more in a posterior tilt. So I'd like you to maybe just hold your hands to the two hip points and tilt the pelvis back and forth a little. And perhaps just allow your breath to correspond the movement as you tilt the pelvis into an anterior tilt. So the tailbone lifts, the pubic bone moves, slides back. Is an inhale. And then as you exhale, begin to let the tailbone slide forward towards the pubic bone slides up towards the belly button. And just move that a few times. And notice how this movement is actually also a spinal movement. And even though you're just moving the pelvis, notice how much of your rib cage is flaring forward as you come into an anterior tilt, or if the rib cage draws backwards as you come into a posterior tilt. So notice how these two structures are moving with each other. Okay, and then begin to also play around a little. Maybe move into a hip rotation. sensing into the relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis here. Notice how your breath is changing or shifting. Begin to get curious about how the movement, this really, really slow explorative movement of rib cage and pelvis is shifting your nervous system as well. So now it's almost as if your pelvis is moving underneath the rib cage, a relatively stable rib cage, if that is possible. Change direction. And then come back to where you feel is center. Come back to where you first begin and notice if anything has shifted for you, if anything has changed in the relationship between the ribcage and the pelvis. Do they feel that they are more aligned with each other? They're resonating a little bit more now, so that there's less gripping, less rigidity, even though you're still in a standing position. And I'd like you to just soften your knee. Soften your knee enough so that you are able to really find the rib cage landing just above the pelvis. So that it's not tilting back or tilting forwards. It's almost as if the two rib points and the two hip points are on the same plane. And I'd like you to just tip your weight forwards and backwards a little and notice how this resonance between the rib cage and the pelvis can be kept. And then I'd like you to place one hand in the front of your belly between the rib cage and the pelvis. So just in the space between the respiratory diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm. And then a corresponding hand, you can place the back of your hand in the back body. Keeping the knees still soft. I'd like you to just shift your weight side to side. Play around a little bit with shifting weight. Notice how these two structures are moving in unison with each other. Not stuck. They're not rigid. But they have a relationship. They have a resonance, a symbiotic relationship. And then I'd like you to just keeping your hands where they are and just make some sounds and sense into the sounds that's coming through the front and the back. Resonating between the two diaphragms. You can make the sound One more time. Allow the next breath to travel in as you slowly allow your legs to straighten a little bit more. Coming back into this baseline position of standing in mountain pose. Notice if there is a movement, an organic movement of breath that's moving through this container between the ribcage and the pelvis. You can try also now taking the hands to either side of your waistline. Once again, it's between the ribcage and the pelvis. And the sound is E. So soften your knees again. Just finding the relationship between the two structures. Exhale to prepare for the sounding. Take a breath in. One more time. And releasing the hands, straightening the legs without locking the knees. Notice the two sides of your body, the two sides of the ribcage to the two sides of the pelvis. And then the last sound we can make is ooh. I'd like you to take your hands, this time one hand on the sternum and the other hand to the lower belly, right down to where the pubic bone is. So you are covering the pubic bone with your hand, once again softening the knees so that there is clarity in the relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis, the pulsation of breath in those two areas, towards the sky, towards the earth, condensing back to the center. Exhale, exhale, exhale. Let the next breath travel in. Coming back to mountain pose, releasing the hands. Have the eyes open or closed. Sensing into what has shifted for you. Earth beneath your feet, sky above you. The pulsation of breath between the respiratory diaphragm, the pelvic diaphragm, the container of your organs, the three-dimensional space that you are taking up. Thank you for your practice.